And you might still be muted, Judith.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Ryan Watts, who's a project manager for Wildlands Incorporated. Ryan has more than 20 years of experience in ecosystem restoration. He specializes in the revegetation of disturbed and newly created stream channels to enhance riparian function, provide habitat value, and to control erosion. He provides project planning oversight and technical services for site preparation, control of exotics, salvaging plants, directly transplanting, and sediment control. He also collects seeds and cuttings and plant provisions, installation, irrigation, and follow-up care and protection. And from the work that I've seen of Ryan, he takes on some of the most difficult sites that I've ever experienced. He also frequently manages and supervises large-scale restoration projects, including the installation of thousands of native plants. Ryan has also served as the Wildlands Nursery Manager since 2011 and supervises all nursery personnel and activities. As a nursery manager, he is responsible for all communication and coordination with clients, nursery personnel, subcontract nurseries, and other parties associated with plant supply contracts. Ryan is bilingual, English and Spanish, and also experienced in maintaining good communication between laborers, landowners, and agency personnel on complex, multidisciplinary riparian restoration projects. He also works closely with local conservation districts to promote the Heritage Garden Program, which supports using native plants in residential landscaping to promote water conservation and wildlife habitat enhancement. And I'm very much looking forward to Ryan's presentation. So Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. You should be able to switch the screens like you were starting to do, and that should help you out. Maybe. Yep. There we go. And you might still be muted.
Oh, I think it said unmuted. All right. Thank you, Judith. First of all, thank you to Tricia, Heather, the Yakima Basin Fish and Wildlife Board, and all of the sponsors, all the hard work that goes into putting something like this on. And I'd also like to give a shout out to colleague Lisa Riley for helping me put together this presentation. I've got a handful of projects under my belt as far as revegetation in riparian restoration goes, but really don't know much about PowerPoint. So thanks again, Lisa. So today, just going to kind of go over some techniques, talk about a few different things, and then I've got some project highlights to go through later in the slideshow. And when I say the evolution of riparian restoration techniques in arid lands, that evolution is over my 20-year career here at Wildlands. So ecologically speaking, 20 years is not very long, but from what I've seen in the evolution of the actual art or practice of riparian restoration, we've come a long ways, and we've definitely learned a lot. Some of the first projects I was ever on, we had planting bags and hodads and a four-wheeler and a couple of pickups, and that was the extent of our crew. And now today, pretty common for us to have a site project where we've got excavators, skid steers, trucks, semis, all sorts of different stuff. So The breadth of riparian restoration is great, and this presentation is going to cover, some of the usual suspects of tasks that are employed within a restoration project. Nowhere is this all-inclusive. Okay, so some challenges. Again, this is not inclusive. Grazing, browsing pressure, whether that's domestic livestock, wildlife. There are a number of our native species that are used in revegetation restoration projects that are particularly palatable to big game. Bovine eats about anything. Non-native and invasive species. There was a number, Tom and Bridger both had mentioned the challenges with that, being that they're highly competitive, require multiple treatments for continuous seasons, long durations, and even more so difficult in a riparian environment with some restrictions restrictions in using certain active ingredients that are found within herbicides. Your soil condition and available moisture within that soil. Also compaction issues, whether this is a newly created site or whether this is something that is looking just to have some revegetation done to it. Typically what you'll find is over the years, compaction has taken place and is an issue. Potential different seed banks, especially with some abandoned agricultural fields. Substrates can be an issue, especially when it comes down to the installation of the plants. Rocky, bony, cobbly substrates are pretty common in riparian areas. And then also the depth to the water table. One of my favorites is project logistics, accesses, challenges, material procurement, multiple agencies, landowners, and in some cases even multiple contractors involved. And to help alleviate all of that, or sometimes make it more difficult, are communication lines. Open lines of communications with all parties involved early on is key. Transparent and known goal or desired outcomes for the project. Scheduling, and then the ability to have in the field, if you will, modifications. So then we go into the practitioner's toolbox. As far as browse protection goes, historically, browse protection, everybody's seen them, the little yellow netting called Vexar, or then even some solid wall tubes that were used for years on specific species. Newer, I guess we'll say, is wire cage, a little more robust browse protection technique, and then even improving upon that is complete exclosure fences. There was a presentation at last year's symposium from Walla Walla on sites that had been completely excluded. Size and type of plant material. The old school size is 10 cubic inch, and plant 2,000 of them per acre, figuring that 50% of them are going to die. More recently, you've seen a move to using larger sizes. For example, a 1 gallon or a tall 1 gallon containerized stock, and then also incorporating into their live stakes or cuttings. Our opinion, an improved version of all of this are some deep-rooted containers. At our nursery, we specially grow riparian species in a 3-inch by 18-inch tube to help get that root mass closer to what perennial moisture. Moisture, weed control, and moisture conservation. Historically, were small individual black mats, 2 foot by 2 foot, evolved into 4 foot by 4 foot, and even more so now, large strips or continuous strips of polypropylene matting, or even applications of hog fuel or shredded wood mulch to be used within restoration. And then you've got the re-veg contractor. Historically, it was just a post-construction involvement. Here's the site, go plant it. Then we started to see more re-veg contractor involvement during project planning and implementation. And probably in the last 6 to 7 years, maybe even 8 years, we have seen quite a few projects where the contractor is actually involved in the design and build of these re-veg projects in conjunction with some sort of riparian restoration, and that includes plant grow out and plant provision. So there's lots of things that go along with that. Again, you're going to hear me say it again and again, is the end goal. What is your client's end goal? There are a lot of options for restoration techniques, and find one that is best for your site. There is no real blanket approach where one size fits all, if you will. If certain permits require certain survival rates that need to be met, so that needs to be addressed. And there's always budget. I get lots of questions on budget, both for the installation of the project and then also the maintenance that goes along with that. I will emphasize that we have found great benefits from having involvement of a revegetation contractor from the cradle to the grave on riparian restoration projects. So we will move to browse protection, which is key. Browse protection is a big deal. Again, what's the goal? And what sort of critters are we trying to protect from? Are we trying to protect from cattle, or are we trying to protect from elk? You'll use different techniques. And then obviously there's deer, there's beaver, there's geese. There's lots of things that restoration sites need to be protected from. Another aspect to this is the aesthetics of a site and the function of that site. Certain browse protection techniques may not be the most aesthetically pleasing. Then there are others that are very blend in well with the site and do a very good job of protecting these newly installed plants. And then are we looking for short-term, or are we looking at a more long-term browse protection technique? So again, the Vexar tubes, I think those go back to being installed since 1987. They're inexpensive. But they're used typically on smaller plant material. They do well against rodents. Then, further along, we started using wire cages and different sized enclosures. Those last longer. You can use larger plant material. And also, whether it's cattle or a wildlife fence, those are two different fences. Big thing here is you're protecting large areas. You're protecting soil resources, potentially newly seeded grasses and different things, whereas the wire cage and the Vexar would be more used for individuals. Okay, so some advantages to the smaller Vexar or solid wall tube. They're inexpensive. They can be installed quite quickly. Does not take much effort to install those. Again, predominantly used for small deer protection, some rodents. The limitations that go along with these is you're not going to put a very big plant in a browse protector that's only 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter. They can stifle plant growth. I've seen on multiple occasions where the snow load has accordioned the Vexar tube with a ponderosa pine inside of it, and that ponderosa pine is also accordioned. They don't often get removed. Most suppliers will tell you that they're plus or minus 3 years, but it's difficult to really put your hand on how readily they will degrade. It's been my experience that it takes quite a bit longer than advertised. But again, for a short term, if you're looking at some rodent damage, they can be effective and fairly inexpensive to install. Wire cages, very versatile technique. They can be fabricated into multiple sizes, which would allow more room for plant growth. They're sturdier and they will help deter deer, elk, and/or cattle. The caveat here is that a deer, elk, or cattle, if they want that plant, they're going to destroy that wire cage too. Can be installed as an individual cage or cut to fit in lengths, creating smaller enclosures. They tend to be a little less expensive than a large-scale fencing project. Lifespan of a wire cage is probably 5 to 7 years, depending on what sort of material is used to anchor it. As you see in the photos, we have found over the years that bamboo is a very tough and dependable product. It's a lot easier to handle, and it's a lot less expensive than steel. And so we have moved when we have the opportunity to help write a plan. We've moved away from T-posts or rebar on this sort of an enclosure. The other thing with this style or this technique is it allows wildlife to move throughout your site. You're not funneling wildlife. There's been some projects I've seen where we've built fences that have created some obstructions for wildlife and caused them to funnel throughout a site. The size of the enclosure is somewhat limited. You don't want big game to be able to jump inside your enclosure. We did some work in, I think it was probably 2005 with the Nature's Conservancy on the Zumwalt Prairie, and the Nature's Conservancy had been doing and collecting data on different sized enclosures on what an elk would or would not jump into. So it's something to definitely keep in mind. They're going to provide, like I said, a lot longer protection than a Vexar tube, but they're not going to last nearly as long as a entire fence. So another thing to keep in mind is what duration you are looking for on those. Fencing. It's maximizing the protected project area. Again, like I said, not only are you protecting the individual plants, but you're protecting soil resources, you're protecting potentially newly seeded grasses. Number of design techniques you see in the photo here. There's T-posts with the polypropylene. That particular fence in that photo is designed to last about 7 years, and then it'll be removed and reused, or just removed. T-posts tend to be able to reuse T-posts, but polypropylene 7 years out in the environment, most likely not going to be able to reuse those. And here, like I was talking about, some thought to it, to put in wildlife gaps. You can't see it on this particular photo, but that fence runs approximately, I think it's about 4,000 linear feet, maybe a skosh more, of a newly constructed channel. And we broke it up into 350 to 400 foot sections, which then had 100 to 150 foot wildlife gap. And inside that gap, we used wire cages and protected the more palatable species and conifer trees. It's definitely the most long-term option for browse protection. Plants, another one of my favorites. Again, have an involvement early on. Plant species and quantities, sizes, those sorts of things need to be thought of in advance to make sure that these are available. You're not going to go to your local nursery and find a block of red osier dogwood like you see there in the picture. So having some forethought to make sure that you've got the appropriate size, species, and parent material of these plants available is key. Another thing to keep in mind that we've seen over the years is don't overthink or try to complicate your species composition. Most of the time what you're looking at in these sorts of projects is you need the pioneer workhorse species in there to help hold the site in place and to create shade and to create all the other microclimates that then the later successional plants will come in on their own. Workhorse species are crucial to a successful project. So again, talking a little more along plant material, size matters. Not all plants are created equally. On a rock bar like the first presentation, you probably don't want to go out and put little 10 cubic inch black cottonwoods. They're probably going to bake in all that sun, and they don't have quite the root mass. One spot we have found where 10 cubic inch plugs work very well is for wetland herbaceous species. Then cuttings, a lot of your willow species, for the most part, apart from upland scalar willow, your riparian willow species do quite well from a live stake. Been our experience, the dogwood and the black cottonwood, not so much, but willows for sure is definitely one that propagates very readily from a cutting, and using cuttings can obviously, a cutting is less to purchase as far as the dollar figure goes. They're cheaper than a rooted plant. And then again, onto the deep rooted containers, whether it be a 3-inch by 18-inch tube, or if it's a Stewie tall 1 gallon, which is a 14-inch pot, that additional depth of the roots is very important. thinking along the lines of what may come into your site in some riparian restoration. Reed canary grass can obviously be an issue, and these smaller size 10 cubic inch plants planted out in whether it's reed canary or whether it's an old ag field of pasture grasses are most likely going to get lost. For riparian restoration in our region, it seems that the deeper the plant's roots are, the better the outcome. So, and it's important to have good quality plant material, not only from a survival standpoint, but just for the handling and the managing of those plants, transporting them throughout a site. If they're maybe not as well rooted as they should have been, you know, your contractor is going to want to be really delicate with them, and then you're going to hear the contractor complain, well, these plants aren't rooted enough, and so having good quality plant material is very important. And we've seen over the years that not only size but the quality of the plant material can make the difference from a plant that is alive to a plant that is vigorously growing. Your plant material can also dictate the method in which you install that plant. Obviously, some of the smaller sizes, 10 cubic inch plant material, pretty easily to plant that with a swing of a hodad or maybe a gas-powered auger. Same with the cuttings, using a gas-powered auger to help get that 2, 3, 4 feet deep hole that you need. If the substrate is as such, water jet stinger can be employed to install cuttings. If you've got much in the way of rock, it's not going to work very well, but it's always an option in some areas where you've got good deep soil. Moving along, improved deep-rooted riparian, mechanical planting, using specialized tools such as the Excavator-Mounted Expandable stinger. That'll come up in some other slides down the road. So, and again here, it'll go back to having experienced contractor and crew, appropriate planting depth and orientation of their roots, your roots vertical, holes deep enough and wide enough to accommodate the plant size that you're installing. Okay, planting methods. Hand planting, quite laborious, but there's a time and a place for everything. Typically works better if you've got some decent dirt. And then you move into a mechanical assisted, which can be more efficient in difficult planting sites, whether they're compacted sites, rocky, gravelly, cobbly sites. Mechanical planting is usually more efficient when using larger sizes, but it still can require a substantial labor force. Moving down to mechanical planting. If you're looking for getting plants deep into the substrate for those species, those riparian species that can be planted that way, Excavator-Mounted Expandable stinger seems to work quite well. But you've got to have the access to get the equipment into the site. I like Tom and Bridger's comment about where a cottonwood would grow and where a cottonwood won't grow. On my notes here is using, having crews and a contractor that understands what micro-siting opportunities look like. Appropriate plant placement can definitely make a difference, without a doubt. And you're talking about sometimes it's only 2 feet one way or another will make a difference on whether or not that plant is alive or that plant actually grows vigorously. In some cases, you may need some additional decompaction. We like planting like species in groups, mimicking what Mother Nature does, and they tend to help each other to get going. Oh, there it is. Excavator-mounted expandable stinger. So this is a patented piece of equipment that attaches to the end of an excavator. You can see there in the pictures, and then in the little drawing in the upper right-hand corner, it gives you a pretty good idea on what that looks like. Thinking along the lines of riparian species, where that stinger is 6 feet deep, as you'll see in some slides coming, there's a potential to be able to plant those species that'll tolerate that: willows, cottonwoods, dogwoods, alders. The ability to plant those deeper into the soil in hopes of reaching that perennial moisture band. They work well on compacted or cobbly rocky substrates. As is, like I'd stated, there's depths of up to 6 feet. And if you look there to the left of the bullets, you'll actually see the containers, the 3-inch by 18-inch containers tend to go through the machine quite well. And we have seen over the years that using this in riparian revegetation, we've seen some dramatic increases in the survival. So, and it's, very effective and efficient in planting of harsh sites, not near as labor intensive. As you can see there, the guy standing by the excavator hardly looks like he's working, and the guy in the cab is pushing buttons. So, but again, it requires access with heavy equipment. So, get into now. I may have to skim through these, running close on time, but particular projects showing techniques. Eagle Rock's Cottonwood establishment. Site history was cleared for agriculture, downstream levees, armored banks, severe bank erosion. Some of the limitations to the site is at low flow, that the groundwater was probably 7 feet deep. There was a band of probably 2 to 3 feet of good, beautiful topsoil, and then below that was a rocky, gravelly substrate. Deer predation, deer browse was a big deal, and this site had been planted quite some time ago using irrigation, and it failed. Moving quickly here. So what we did is we went in ahead of time. As you can see, we laid out polygons. The excavator came in where it needed to. The excavator dug trenches up to 3 feet deep. Then we put the expandable stinger on, and we put that stinger another 6 feet in the ground. So then you potentially had your root depth to 9 to 10 feet below grade. On this particular project, that was deep enough that we were in contact with perennial moisture. There's a photo of the original site before we got there. There's the middle photo of an action shot, if you will. And there on the far right, post-planting, September of 2016. Some really good survival that came along with these, and not just survival, but vigor. We're seeing significant plant growth. Some mulching strategies, polypropylene, individual mats. You can see there on the left, and in conjunction with that project, we used some herbicides, hog fuel, and then continuous strip mats. Lots of options, just depends on the site. We'll skip through a few of these because I think I'm going to run out of time. Logistics and communication, pretty key. So we did a project a few years back that was on an island, and it required an expandable Stinger excavator to reach the depths that we needed. Prime example of communication and logistics. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work. Coordinating with all the parties involved. Collecting that particular project was 12,000 8-foot cuttings that we had supplied and then installed. Required a barge to get all of the equipment, honey buckets, fuel, etc. there. And then every day our commute was half an hour in a pickup and about 45 minutes in a boat. The goal on this project was to deter the Caspian tern from nesting on this particular island, and that was made clear from the get-go. And the planting plan was created to meet that goal, meet that objective. Russian olive removal, stump cut treatments, and then 2 years of follow-up herbicide applications to treat the resprouts. And really, overall, you can see here on this July 19 Google Earth image, we had really good survival. And there was 12 different planting units, and I think 9 of those 12 hit 80% survival and never had to be replanted. There were a few of those that did require some replanting. So, in summary, riparian restoration is involved over time, is no longer a rote prescription. There's now a greater variety of tools at the restoration practitioner's disposal. Again, you can't, not one meets all. Having a restoration contractor involved in the planning stages can contribute sustainability to the project's feasibility and success. A couple quick lessons learned. Be careful where you drive big tractors. Could be wet. You get stuck. Never underestimate the importance of browse protection. If you look at this photo, you see cow pies and elk turds, and you see what they did to that particular project. Again, some lessons learned. You probably shouldn't have those wire cages where they're at, but you learned one. Maintenance. I was going to beat this one over the head, but slow of time. If you notice the Scotch thistle that came in, fortunately on that contract we did have maintenance, and so that's not what it looks like today. Water moves. Be prepared to adapt. Planting plans can be designed with all the thought that you've got, and water will change your mind. And that's it.
Thank you, Ryan. We have one question. That was great. When is the best time for a project manager during project scoping, planning, and design to involve a contractor such as yourself?
As early as possible. It seems recently in the last probably 10 years where we're seeing a lot more in-stream work involving channels and log structures and such. And we're usually brought in around the 60% design phase, and we'll design a re-veg plan on the 60% design.
Thank you.